Okay, so this side, remember I rotated the bike this way so I could comprehend how the motor wiring harness went down, because I don't want this, I certainly don't want this in the way of the rotating tire. And also I put the pannier up more or less flush against the frame, so I don't want the motor wiring harness interfering between the frame and my pannier. So that's why this goes that way. I've got my drip loop here. So when it rains, the water goes here and then goes down like that as opposed to going in there. I see there's some thread locking compound here. I'm going to wipe it off because I don't want that to find its way to the brake rotor. Also, when I change a flat tire, my bike is so greasy and dirty. I spend a lot of time cleaning it. And that's just from the chain oil. Okay, so it's very important to make sure that this gets out of the way of the pannier. So when I do this, I make sure not to pull on any of these connectors. So here's the hall sensor connector. I can make myself some room here. So I'm going to look at the pins, make sure I'm putting it together right. So here I'm just connecting the 5-pin hall sensor connector. That's a JST connector. And I'm going to hear for a click. I heard a click. And I'm convinced that that is attached securely. And then here's the temp sensor connector. I'm going to look at the pins, look at the male and the female, make sure I'm putting it together properly. Listening for a click. Good, good. And here's the 3 phase wires. One thing is if these are making contact with each other, the wheel will cog. And that can be a really frustrating problem to diagnose, because you'll have it all put together and you don't know it, but these motor wires are touching one another. And if they're touching one another, it causes the wheel to cog, and that's not going to work. So just the point is to make sure that all these 3 phase wires always stay separated. So what I do is I have this little wiring conduit looming, and that's going to provide insulation. And I use little zip ties. I hope I bought some little zip ties. I don't have little zip ties, so that's gonna delay the whole project. So I'll just go as far as I can go. Too bad I didn't buy small zip ties. Very disappointed in myself. So the wiring, I'm gonna connect the blue to the blue. This is an XT150. Make sure it's connected all the way. And then put the wiring conduit on there, making sure that the bullet connector stays fully seated. This is one of the biggest hassles of the whole project, because if I had a mid-drive, I wouldn't even have to mess with the wiring harness when I got a flat tire, so that's frustrating. So checking that it's fully seated. Put on the wire loom around it. And I think so that I can get this project going, I'll just put on some electrical tape today, since I failed to buy small zip ties. So I'm definitely checking that that's fully seated. Very paranoid about that. Okay, so that is fully seated, and I got the wiring conduit on there, so I'll get a little piece of electrical tape. Did find a colored electrical tape, so that's handy. So that's going to match. So I'm working on the glue. And yes, I'm going to check that it's still fully connected. To the point where I'm going to take it off, check it. Now I'm convinced it's fully connected. So that's the blue one. What color is this guy? That's green. Okay, good. So this is definitely the blue one. So now it's just a matter of securing the wiring conduit. And next time I get a flat tire, I'll be taking this back off. Hopefully that won't occur until the tire's bald. So I'm gonna kind of overdo this for two reasons. One, to keep out water, and two, to keep it from getting pulled on and detached. So I'm overdoing it. Well, any sane person would think that was enough tape, but I'm going to put on one more piece of tape. There we go. I think the next ones might only get 2 pieces of tape. So now I'll do either the yellow or the green, obviously. Here's another piece of wiring conduit. And I saw the yellow one first, so I'm going to do that. There's no order. So yellow to yellow, check, check. Fully seated. You know, if I was so worried about that being fully seated, I'd put some electrical tape around that, but I guess I'm not that worried about it. So I'm going to spread the wire loom. Push it on the wire. And after I do that, I'm going to check out that it's still fully seated. And of course it is. So now I'm convinced it's fully seated. I'm just going to go with 2 pieces of tape. Let's be reasonable. So that's sliding back and forth. That could present a problem. So what I'll do is when I do this other one, I'll have the tape do a second job of anchoring the wiring conduit to the motor wire. So there it's anchored to the motor wire. And holding closes. This looming is also held closed with tension. So now I only have one more wire to do. It's the green one. There we go. It is fully seated. I'll make sure not to pull on it in a bad way. Now I'm going to check that it's still fully seated. Indeed it is. Now all this exposed, so to speak, wiring is going to get a big piece of wire loom over it. And then one more piece of wire looming over all that just for good measure. The idea being to keep out water. So So this piece of tape aims to keep it closed. And you get an extra long piece here because this is also going to serve to anchor it in place. Okay, so that's all together. That'll give me motor power. So now I'm going to put some wire looming over all that. This is really fat wire looming. I'm reusing it. Here I can use big zip ties. I have plenty of big zip ties. When I use zip ties, I get a side cutter and needle nose pliers. So this, even though it's really fat, it doesn't cover the whole thing. So this is going to cover half. So then I'm spreading it apart, getting it on there, and then gently getting that in there. It's not going to fit, it's too big. This looks like an anaconda that ate a deer or something. Or maybe I want to say a mouse that ate a rat. So sort of around there. That would cover at least 50%. I like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a cable tie here and get one end real good. And here I'm definitely thinking about water going in. Even though I try not to ride my e-bikes in the rain, sometimes I end up riding them in the rain for whatever reason. So I pull these pretty tight, but not like a maniac. Pretty darn tight. Sometimes like, well, that was certainly tight enough. No reason to be ridiculous. And now I'm gonna do one in the middle. There's a part there where the connectors are. I'm gonna get it right there. Keep that in place. And this one I'm not gonna tighten very tight, because there's no reason to put a strain on that electrical connector. So there's just a little comfortable. I don't know what happened to the side cutters. Here they are. They're on the saddle. And now this is another cable tie that I don't want to do too tight. Just a little bit to keep it together. And then this bottom cable tie is meant to anchor the wire looming to the motor wiring harness sheath. So that is going to be pretty tight. Now, because I have exposed wires there, I'm going to put another wire loom over that. Cover where I see electrical wiring. Okay, so I've got all the wiring covered. Apparently I'm wanting to put the side cutters on the saddle. And then working downward, this here in the middle wants to be tucked in. I'm not pulling it very tight. And then one more at the bottom to serve to anchor the wire loom to the motor wiring harness sheath. So that was a lot of cable ties. Too bad I got a flat tire. But actually the tire was bald anyway, so that's good to go. So now it's a matter of anchoring this wiring harness to the frame, getting ready to put on the pannier. So this is the battery connector that goes over that. So this, I'm trying to hide my motor. So the pannier goes out about this far. So I'm going to try to bring this in here, and I'm going to accomplish that with a cable tie. Bringing up this wiring harness out of view of whoever might be offended that I have a motor on my bike, whoever that might be. So I'm going to lift it up out of view. Not pulling on anything, and I'm also not wanting the rotating tire to get into the any of the wiring. So now I'm going to give it a little twist right here. There we go. And to orient the motor wiring harness in the vertical position so it stays out of the way of the rotating tire, I'm going to go like that. So I think water would stay out of there. Either that or water would get in and stay in. So here's a vertical orientation. Vertical orientation, and tighten that. Now there's an issue with the top of the motor wiring harness with a rotating wheel. So this is going to be coming like this into the pannier, and the wheel's going to rotate. So it is out of the way. That's awesome. But I do want to anchor it. So if I put these two together and this is pulled in, that'll pull this into the pannier when the pannier's on there. So I'm going to anchor these two together, and that'll keep this guy out of the way of the tire. Yeah, that would happen by itself. So that's good to go. So now I'm going to put on the pannier. So I had to repair this pannier because I went down real hard on this side and it bent right here. And it broke probably 8 rivets, which it did its job. It's supposed to save the battery from getting damaged, and it did. So I put the battery box in the pannier. Very tight fit. And this pannier has a hard life. Holes need to go on the outside. Usually when I get a flat, I don't need to take these out, but I had to take this one out because it was all bent. So with all this work, every time I get a flat tire, I'm like, oh man, I know what I'm in for. So the Pannier's ready to go on. And I'm missing 2 nuts. And I found them. I found one. So 1 nut has disappeared from the scene. So I have a bunch of grade 8 nuts here. And this is coarse threads. This is coarse threads. So here's a replacement nut. Testing it. It's gonna work. So like on the other side, I'll start 1 bolt by hand. So I need a nut and that, and a washer and a lock nut. The battery box has holes in it for the bolts, and the Pannier has holes for the bolts to come through. I want a washer there. So there's one. My battery connector's a little in the way, so I'm going to start this by hand. My battery connector's making a problem of itself. So I'll put it in the spokes, and then hopefully not rotate the tire. Here's my other bolt. I should have started the bolts through the Pannier. I made a mistake. I should have put both the bolts through the Pannier before I put it up on the bike. So that I can get a washer in there. And then when I put it through, I can put the 2 bolts through the holes. Okay. Ready to go. Good thing I moved the battery connector. That would have totally gotten in the way. So there's the issue of the aerodynamic thing. I've got to pull it back like this. So I'll use my knee to do that. And I'll be a little more comfortable if I lower this. Need to make sure to release the brake. Seven 16th wrenches for 1/4 inch bolts. And I'm doing a sequential tightening. Oh, that had a long way to travel. It was an unusual amount of travel for that bolt. Oh, that's because it was bending the battery box in. Well, at least it's tight. It's very tight. So now I'm going to put in the batteries. Here's the batteries, 36 volts, 19.8 amp hours. Make sure it's all the way to the bottom. Stick through my battery connector. Not tangled in the spokes, obviously. I'll get to do a test here in a second. It has power, so I'm going to pull the battery cables through all the way, so it's not hung up in the spokes. So I'm going to make sure that this isn't interfering. Lots of room. And I'll put it in low speed for a test, because I have a 3-speed switch, low, medium, and high, so may as well put it in low for the test. Cross my fingers. So that's low, that's good. I'm happy. And the regen braking works, so it works in low. Now I'll do medium. Regen braking is good. The motor temp sensor says 18.7 degrees. Now I'll put it in high. We can heat up the motor a little bit. 18.4 degrees Celsius. Yep, the motor's heating up. So it would appear that the temp sensor is working. Yep, it's good to go. Now all I have to do is put in the tube slime.